I'm putting this online because the police have stopped looking. The media has moved on, and I am losing my mind keeping this locked inside my head. I know how it sounds. I know people will think I'm traumatized or that I'm making up a monster to cope with a tragedy. But I swear on everything I have left, this is exactly what happened to Sarah and me in those woods. Sarah and I had been best friends since we were 7 years old. Over the last couple of years, life had gotten messy. We both got demanding jobs, moved to different parts of the state, and barely had time to text, let alone see each other. We missed each other terribly. So, when we finally managed to clear our schedules for a 4-day weekend, we wanted to do something completely off the grid. No phones, no emails, just a deep, peaceful catch-up. We chose a massive, dense state park, famous for its ancient, undisturbed wilderness. The trip started out perfect. It was everything we had hoped for. The drive up was filled with loud music, terrible singing, and endless laughing as we recounted old memories. By early afternoon, we reached the dirt parking lot at the edge of the wilderness area, the designated spot where backpackers leave their vehicles before hiking into the deep woods. There were only 2 other cars parked there, adding to that beautiful sense of total isolation. We laced up our boots, grabbed our heavy day packs, and started down the main trail. The forest was breathtaking. The sun was filtering through a thick canopy of emerald leaves, and the air smelled purely of pine and damp earth. We were having so much fun talking, gossiping, and rebuilding our connection that we completely stopped paying attention to our surroundings. The main trail was well marked with bright white paint strips on the trees, but at some point, we must have stepped off the path to look at a scenic overlook or a rock formation. We kept walking, completely oblivious, deeper and deeper into the wilderness. It was still broad daylight when the first wave of unease hit me. I stopped walking and looked around. The thick undergrowth had swallowed the path. There were no white markers anymore. The trees looked tighter, older, and strangely suffocating. I pulled out my phone. 0 bars. Sarah laughed it off at first, telling me we just needed to retrace our steps. But as we turned around and began walking back in the direction we thought we came, the forest seemed to twist itself around us. Every ridge looked identical. Every fallen log looked like the last one we passed. The sun began to drop with a terrifying speed. In the woods, daylight doesn't fade slowly. The canopy just turns from green to black, and suddenly the shadows stretch out to grab you. Panic set in when we realized we didn't just lose the trail, we had no idea where our campsite was. Our tent, our sleeping bags, our food, and our flashlights were all packed away in the heavy gear drops we hadn't reached yet. We had absolutely nothing on us except the clothes on our backs and the fading battery of Sarah's phone flashlight. Night fell like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The temperature plummeted, and the cheerful forest sounds of the afternoon dissolved into a dead, unnatural silence. There were no crickets, no owls, just a heavy, stagnant stillness that felt like something was holding its breath, watching us stumble through the dark. We were freezing, walking blind, using the weak, bluish beam of Sarah's phone to navigate the jagged rocks and thick root. Around midnight, we heard the sound. It wasn't an animal rustling through the leaves. It was a wet, heavy, rhythmic dragging noise, accompanied by the distinct sound of bones clicking against each other. Click-clack, click-clack. It was coming from the shadows just beyond the reach of our phone light. We froze, gripping each other's hands so tightly our knuckles turned white. Sarah raised the phone, sweeping the weak light across the dense trees. The light caught a glimpse of it, just for a fraction of a second, before it melted back into the dark. It was impossible to see clearly, but my brain registered a shape that broke every rule of nature. It was an entity with impossibly elongated, spindly limbs hunched over on all fours. Its skin was a sickly, dark brownish gray, entirely hairless and stretched so tight over its ribcage that its bones looked ready to burst through the flesh. It had no clothes, no fur, nothing. Just raw, emaciated malice. "Run," I whispered. But Sarah was paralyzed with fear. Then, the entity moved. It didn't run like a dog or a man. It moved with a sickening, chaotic, hyperextended scurry, covering 20 yards in the blink of an eye. The phone light hit its face, and the images burned into the back of my eyelids forever. It had two massive, bulbous, milky white eyes that completely lacked pupils. They didn't reflect the light, they seemed to absorb it. Before either of us could even scream, the creature lunged. The attack was violently, horrifyingly fast. It hit Sarah with a physical force that sounded like a car crash. I watched in absolute helpless horror as its elongated, multi-jointed arms wrapped around her. It didn't bare teeth or growl, it just let out a wet clicking hiss as it violently yanked her backward into the pitch-black brush. The phone dropped to the dirt, the screen cracking but staying lit. In that fractured light, I saw Sarah's face for one last microsecond, her eyes wide with pure, unadulterated terror, as she was dragged at an impossible speed into the dark. I heard the sickening sound of her jacket tearing, the brutal snap of branches, and then a single, choked-off shriek that suddenly ended with a wet, heavy thud. Primal, blind survival instinct took over my entire body. I didn't try to save her. I didn't look for a weapon. I turned and ran. I sprinted through the pitch black, entirely blind. Branches whipped across my face, cutting my cheeks, and sharp briars tore through my jeans. But I didn't feel the pain. I fell down steep dirt embankments, rolled over jagged rocks, and scrambled back to my feet, running from the clicking sound that I felt was chasing me from the canopy above. The darkness was absolute. I couldn't see my own hands in front of my face. Every shadow looked like those elongated limbs reaching out to snap my neck. For hours, I wandered through the freezing night alone, completely lost in a psychological nightmare. I kept waiting for those massive milky white eyes to blink open in front of my face. I kept waiting for the violent yank into the dark. I don't know why it let me go. Maybe it was full. Maybe it enjoyed the sport of watching me run himself to exhaustion. As the sky finally began to turn a pale, cold gray with the morning light, my strength gave out. I collapsed onto a bed of damp moss, sobbing, covered in my own blood and filth. But as I looked up through my tears, I saw something glittering through the trees. Asphalt. I had stumbled onto a remote, two-lane highway at the absolute furthest boundary of the state park. I dragged my broken body onto the road, stumbling blindly down the yellow lines until a passing logging truck slammed on its brakes. The driver took one look at my face, wrapped me in a blanket, and called the authorities. The search and rescue teams combed those woods for 2 weeks. They found our car at the parking lot, untouched. They even found the cracked phone in the dirt where Sarah was taken. But there was no sign of her. No clothes, no blood trail, nothing. The police told the media it was a tragic case of a wild animal attack, or that we simply got disoriented and she fell into one of the deep, uncharted ravines. But I know the truth. I know what I saw in that fractured phone light. I know that something old, hairless, and impossibly hostile is living in the deepest, dark corners of those woods, watching the trail markers, waiting for people to lose their way. I haven't slept a full night since it happened. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that sickening bone-clicking sound in the dark, and I see Sarah being pulled into the abyss.
I am typing this with my left hand. It takes me twice as long now, and my fingers slip on the keys. But I have to write this down before the doctors pump me full of more sedatives. They tell me the phantom pains are just my nervous system misfiring. They tell me my brain is playing tricks on me to cope with the trauma of a violent home invasion. Mark believes them. He sits by my hospital bed, holding my remaining hand, telling me how lucky we are to be alive and how the police will eventually catch the man who did this to me. But Mark didn't see it. He was on the other side of the wall. He didn't look into those eyes. He thinks a desperate junkie with a machete climbed through our window. But I know what took my arm. I know it wasn't a man. Mark and I bought our house 2 years ago. It's a modest, modern home at the absolute furthest edge of a quiet, boring suburban development. We chose it specifically because it was the last plot on the street, offering a sense of privacy that's hard to find in a cookie-cutter neighborhood. Our backyard doesn't face another house. It faces a dense, overgrown patch of woods. It isn't a massive state forest, just a forgotten half-mile strip of ancient trees that snakes behind the perimeter of the neighborhood, connecting the final few backyards on our block like a dark, shared alleyway. We loved the view at first. We set up a patio, planted a garden and thought the woods were peaceful. We never noticed how the birds stopped singing around dusk. We never questioned why the stray cats in the neighborhood completely vanished within a month of us moving in. It happened on a hot, suffocating Tuesday night in July. The air conditioning in the house had died earlier that afternoon, leaving the rooms heavy and thick with heat. We couldn't sleep. Around 1 a.m., Mark got frustrated, kicked off the sheets, and said he was going down to the basement where the concrete floors kept the air a little cooler. I stayed in our second-story bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to the ambient hum of the suburbs. 20 minutes later, the air in the bedroom suddenly changed. A wave of rancid, stagnant odor blew through the open window screens. It smelled like copper, wet rot, and the iron-heavy scent of a slaughterhouse. It was so intense it made the back of my throat burn. Before I could even sit up, a horrific, metallic screech tore through the quiet house. Crunch. It was the sound of the heavy iron security grate on our first-floor kitchen window being warped and torn out of the brickwork like tinfoil. My heart instantly slammed against my ribs. I scrambled out of bed, my bare feet hitting the hardwood floor. Downstairs in the basement, I heard Mark scream out in pure panic. What was that? Who's up there? His voice was muffled by the thick wooden basement door, vibrating through the vents. I opened my bedroom to shout back to him, to tell him to lock himself in the utility room, but the words died in my throat. I heard something step through the broken kitchen window. It didn't sound like a man. A human burglar wears rubber-soled shoes, steps carefully over shattered glass, and moves with a clumsy weight. What entered our house moved with a heavy bipedal stride, but every single footstep was accompanied by the sharp, terrifying click-clack of massive, razor-sharp claws striking the linoleum. It walked with a heavy, rhythmic thump, moving from the kitchen, through the dining room, and straight toward the stairs. Down in the dark basement, completely blind to what was happening above him, Mark was panicking. I could hear him violently throwing his weight against the basement door, trying to force the swollen wooden frame open, screaming my name over and over again. "I am trapped. The door is stuck. Call the police. Someone is in the house." His screams were deafening, echoing through the floorboards, creating a chaotic wall of sound. And that noise is what saved his life. It drew the entity away from the basement door and straight up the stairs toward me. I stood paralyzed at the top of the staircase, completely trapped. The window in my bedroom had a heavy security lock. There was no escape. I watched the darkness of the stairwell. The ambient light from the street filtered through the hallway window, casting long geometric shadows against the wall. And then, the shadow rose. It was a nightmare made physical. The silhouette that stretched across the drywall was impossibly broad-shouldered, tapering down to a narrow, athletic waist, standing easily over 2.5 meters tall. But the head was the unmistakably elongated, jagged shape of a massive, prehistoric wolf. The pointed ears were pinned flat against its skull, and its chest heaved with a rapid, wet, predatory breath. It reached the top landing, stepping into the dim light. My mind shattered. It stood on 2 muscular, backwards-bent canine legs, covered in a coarse, matted coat of ash-black fur. Its upper lip was curled back in a silent, monstrous grimace, exposing a crowded, glistening row of white fangs dripping with thick strands of saliva. But it was the eyes that froze the blood in my veins. They were huge, amber yellow, burning with a sickening, cruel intelligence. It wasn't an animal operating on instinct. It was a monster that enjoyed the terror it was inflicting. I didn't have a weapon. In a flash of blind, hysterical survival instinct, I grabbed the heavy ceramic lamp from the hallway table and hurled it at the creature's face. The lamp shattered against its muscular chest. It didn't even flinch. Instead, the gesture of defiance enraged it. The dogman let out a deep, chest-rattling, deafening growl that literally shook the plaster off the walls. It lunged. I raised my right arm in a desperate, pathetic attempt to shield my face. The attack was a blur of raw, terrifying velocity. I didn't see its jaws snap. I didn't feel a blade. I just felt a sudden, crushing, unimaginable pressure on my shoulder, followed by a violent, sickening yank that lifted my entire body off the floor and slammed me against the wall. Then came the heat. A boiling, agonizing heat exploded down the right side of my torso. I looked down in the dim light. The creature's massive, multi-jointed claw had pinched through the solid bone and muscle of my upper arm. With a single, casual flick of its wrist, it didn't just bite me. It cleanly, brutally sheared my entire right arm away from my shoulder socket. I fell to my knees, a high-pitched, choked scream tearing from my throat. Blood was spraying violently from the gaping wound, painting the white wallpaper in a horrific crimson sheet. The pain was an absolute, white-hot fog that blinded my vision. Through the haze, I watched the monster drop the severed limb onto the floor. It leaned down, its wet black snout inches from my face, drinking in the scent of my agony. It let out a low, vibrational clicking sound deep within its throat. It was satisfied. It had broken me. Downstairs, the chaotic banging continued. Mark had finally found a crowbar or tool in the basement, and he was violently splintering the bottom of the basement door, still screaming my name, completely oblivious to the butchery happening 10 feet above. "I am coming! I am breaking the lock. Hang on." The creature tilted its head toward the sound of Mark's screams. It realized the house was no longer quiet. With a lightning-fast, sickeningly fluid motion, it dropped down from its hind legs onto all fours. It didn't look back at me. It bounded down the hallway, shattered the glass of the master bedroom window, and dove out into the night, disappearing into the dark canopy of the connecting woods. A few seconds later, Mark finally broke through the basement door. He ran up the stairs, hyperventilating, holding a metal tool, ready to fight off a human intruder. He didn't see the monster. He didn't see the fur or the claws. All he saw was the shattered window, the blood-soaked hallway, and me, collapsed in a pool of my own dying warmth, clutching an empty, jagged shoulder socket. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They did a full forensic sweep of the house. They found the warped iron grate on the kitchen window. They found the massive pools of blood. But because the creature's claws were so clean and its exit so fast, the investigators concluded it was a highly professional, brutally violent assault by a human attacker using a heavy, curved blade. They think someone targeted us for a robbery, panicked when Mark started screaming from the basement, mutilated me, and escaped through the bedroom window. Mark believes them. He sits by my hospital bed every single day, whispering that the police are checking security cameras on the main road, telling me that the man who did this will face justice. He looks at me with so much pity when I try to tell him the truth. He thinks the trauma has broken my mind. He thinks the blood loss made me hallucinate a two-legged wolf in the dark. But I know what's real. I can still smell the rancid sulfur and wet fur that lingers in the back of my throat. And tonight, as the hospital room grew quiet and the nurse stepped out, I looked out the window. My room is on the 3rd floor, overlooking a small patch of trees on the hospital grounds. And there, hidden in the deep shadows of the branches, fully illuminated by the pale moonlight, were 2 unblinking amber-yellow eyes, staring straight up at my room, waiting for me to come home.